They didn't answer your message, but they read it. They looked at your story, but they didn't reach out. They praised someone else for the same thing you bled to give them. And the worst part? You didn't say anything. You waited. You made excuses for them. You told yourself to be patient, to stay kind, to not take it personally. But deep down, you felt it. That quiet sting in your gut. The invisible slap to your dignity. The burn of realizing they see you. They just don't respect you. That's the part no one admits. We talk about loyalty. We talk about love. We talk about communication. But what we don't talk about is this. Every day you don't choose yourself, someone else learns they don't have to either. This isn't a video about fixing your mindset. This isn't about being positive. This is about reclaiming psychological territory. They call it selfish. They call it arrogant. But that's only because your silence made them comfortable. Your focus on them gave them leverage. You were taught to be kind, to be soft, to be good. But no one taught you the cost of being emotionally available to the wrong people. No one told you that being easy to reach makes you easier to forget. Here's what they don't want you to know, and what you've known all along. You don't get power by being seen. You get power by being missed. If you've ever been taken for granted, if you've ever been discarded, overlooked, or tolerated, this isn't just a message. This is a warning. Self-focus isn't isolation. It's strategy. Because when your attention turns inward, everything changes not around you, but beneath you. If any part of you is still holding on, still hoping they'll come back, still wanting closure, still needing them to see your worth good, keep listening. Subscribe if you know this isn't just content, it's confrontation. They always say the same thing. You've changed. They don't say it with curiosity. They say it with panic. Because when you stop reacting, they lose their script. When you stop explaining yourself, they lose their grip. And when you stop chasing the role they built for you, the performance ends and you become unreadable. They don't hate that you changed. They hate that they can't predict you anymore. You think people want to understand you? They don't. They want to contain you, define you, keep you legible, obedient, consistent, so they know how to use you. But when you start focusing on yourself, not in a loud, theatrical way, but in a quiet, strategic, surgical way, you become the one thing they fear most, uncontrolled. Because now, you're not looking for permission. You're not broadcasting your emotions. You're not handing them the blueprint to your buttons. You've learned to sit with your hunger instead of begging them to feed it. You've learned to delay your reply instead of rushing to prove your worth. You've learned to study the silence, not fill it. And in that silence, something shifts. You stop trying to win them over and start wondering why you needed to. You stop asking what they meant and start watching what they chose. You stop needing closure because their actions already were. That's the first fracture in the old identity, the one built on pleasing, proving, performing. It doesn't break all at once. It collapses in pieces. Every time you withhold access, every time you don't answer what they used to control, every time you pull back your energy, your empathy, your attention and keep it, that's when they feel it. They don't feel your words, they feel your absence. But here's the truth. The goal isn't to make them notice. That's still weakness in disguise. The goal is to stop caring if they do. Because Machiavelli never said to be feared instead of loved for drama. He said it for leverage. Love is a gift. Fear is a boundary. When you stop being available, they stop being careless. Not because you demanded it, but because you disappeared. And if that scares them, let it. Because power doesn't beg to be understood. It just walks away and lets silence do the talking. You used to think they didn't understand you. They did. They understood exactly what you were: compliant, emotionally generous, afraid of being misunderstood. They understood you so well, they bet on your loyalty over your self-respect. And they were right for a while, because you stayed when you should have left. You gave them the benefit of the doubt while they gave you patterns disguised as mistakes. You defended them to people who saw the truth before you did. And what did they give you in return? Breadcrumbs. The occasional compliment. A delayed response. Just enough affection to keep you hopeful. Just enough silence to keep you insecure. That wasn't love. That was strategy. And you participated because it felt familiar. You were taught to prove your worth, to stay likable, to not be too much. So instead of leaving the room, you lowered your voice. Instead of drawing a line, you made excuses. Instead of being seen as difficult, you chose to be disrespected. And you called it love. You called it understanding. You told yourself, they're just going through something. Or worse, maybe I am too sensitive. But now, that sensitivity, it's not weakness. It's data. It's radar. It's precision. It told you what your logic was too slow to admit that you were being devalued. They didn't ghost you by accident. They ghosted you because it worked. They didn't forget your worth. They tested it. And they watched you stay. But here's the pivot point. You're not angry anymore. You're not sad. You're not craving revenge. You're becoming cold. Not bitter. Not hateful. Cold. Controlled. Because you finally understand the real lesson. Being good to the wrong people is self-harm. And the ones who used you for your empathy, they didn't steal your light. You handed it to them. But now, it's returned. Not soft. Not warm. Not open. But focused. Direct. Surgical. And they won't recognize you. They'll keep looking for the version they manipulated. The one who apologized for their silence. The one who over-explained to avoid abandonment. The one who tried to stay lovable while being slowly erased. That version is gone, buried beneath every quiet betrayal, every minimized instinct, every message left unanswered. And what's left? Stillness, not peace, not happiness, not closure. Something stronger, presence. The kind they can't feed off, the kind they can't decode, the kind they can't manipulate. You didn't get it from healing. You got it from remembering what you tolerated, what you became, and what you'll never be again. They'll circle back. They always do. Not because they've changed, but because you have. They can feel it, even through silence, especially through silence. That invisible shift in energy, the recalibration, the disappearance of emotional credit. You were once their safety net, their secret weapon, their emotional sponge. You responded quickly. You forgave easily. You made excuses on their behalf. Now you're an echo, a closed door, a mirror they can't avoid. And so they reach out, carefully, slowly, not with accountability, but with bait. Hey, just thinking about you, I miss the way we used to talk. No one else really gets me like you do. But here's the part they'll never say out loud. They don't miss you. They miss your access, your softness, your silence. They miss the version of you that didn't know better, because that version could be used. They don't come back for closure. They come back for control, because your growth insults their script. Your detachment breaks their formula. Your new self-awareness is a threat, not a reunion. You've become the thing they never prepared for. Unreachable. And that kills them, because what they mistook for kindness was actually power. What they mistook for weakness was restraint. You never needed them. You just didn't know it yet. Now you do, so you don't delete the message. You don't respond either. You just see it for what it is, a test, a trap, a return to the old cycle, rebranded as nostalgia. But you've outgrown the performance. You've dismantled the role. You've seen what pretending costs you. And more importantly, you've seen what withholding gives you. You're no longer asking, why did they do this? You're asking, why did I allow it? That question alone rewrites your emotional DNA. Because this isn't about them. It never was. They were just the symptom, the mirror, the spark. The real enemy was your own pattern, your own permission, your own hunger to be seen by people who needed you small to feel powerful. Now, you don't need to be seen. You just need to be undisturbed, not adored, not validated. Just left the fuck alone so you can build in silence, move in silence, rise in silence. Because nothing terrifies the manipulator more than the one who no longer explains, the one who doesn't argue, the one who simply stops playing. You were never weak. You were available. There's a difference. Weakness bends under pressure. You didn't bend, you tolerated. You adjusted. You carried weight that wasn't yours. You absorbed moods. You rationalized distance. You gave when they withheld, and you called it strength. But real strength? It's not reactive. It's selective. It doesn't beg. It doesn't chase. It doesn't explain. It watches, and then it withdraws. You see, they never feared losing you because you never showed them it was a possibility. Every time you reached out first, they learned patience was power. Every time you forgave them without conditions, they learned guilt was currency. Every time you lowered your standards to keep the peace, they learned your peace could be bought. That wasn't love. That was leverage. They weren't connected to you. They were addicted to what you gave them: your silence, your reassurance, your blind loyalty. And now they're starving because the supply's been cut off. Not by revenge, not by anger, by clarity. The realization that your attention was never free. It was currency, and you gave it away like it was worthless. Not anymore. Now, you don't show up unless it's mutual. Now, you don't respond unless it's respectful. Now, you don't explain because your presence is the explanation. You are no longer working on boundaries. You are the boundary, and they can feel it. You used to crave understanding. Now you crave distance. You used to ask, why did they do that? Now you ask, why would I ever go back? That's not ego, that's evolution. It's what happens when the nice one gets tired. Not loud, not dramatic. Just done. You don't unfriend. You don't block. You don't announce. You just vanish from their reach. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually. They think you're bitter. You're not. You're finished. And once you cross that line, there's no performance to return to. Just power. Silent. Precise. Unapologetiz. They'll rewrite the story. Not to tell the truth, but to protect their image. She switched up. He just disappeared. They're cold now, but they won't mention what led to it. They won't talk about the subtle digs, the delayed replies, the way they weaponize silence to keep you unsure. They won't mention how often you showed up, even when it drained you. How many times you asked for clarity and were met with attitude. How many nights you reread messages, trying to decode disrespect dressed as indifference. They won't mention the shift in their tone when they knew you cared more. The strategic inconsistency, the highs followed by silence, the addiction they built and blamed you for having. They'll leave that part out, because admitting the truth would require admitting they had power, and they used it. Not for love, not for connection, for control. But here's what they never expected. You stopped waiting. You stopped hoping. You stopped trying to fix a dynamic that was never broken, just designed to keep you beneath them. They thrived on the version of you that didn't know your value. Now, they're looking at a stranger. Still, you just no longer theirs. You don't argue. You don't justify. You don't clear the air. You let their stories circulate. You let the misunderstandings spread. Because when you're truly done, you don't correct the lie. You become so far removed, it doesn't even reach you. That's not indifference. That's dominance. And the most threatening thing to someone who once controlled your emotions is your ability to stay unaffected. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've mastered the pain. You've made peace with being misunderstood. Because people who fear losing you will listen. People who fear being exposed will lie. You no longer speak to both. You only speak to yourself. You're no longer available for the performance. You're no longer an actor in their script. You're the author now. And your new story doesn't include them. Not as a villain, not as a memory, not even as a lesson. They are nothing. Because once you stop needing closure, attention, or justice, they lose their only weapon. your need for them. And when they lose that, they lose everything. You don't even flinch anymore. You hear their name in a room, and your pulse doesn't change. You see their face in an old photo, and there's no reaction, just silence, stillness, clarity. Because it wasn't heartbreak, it was extraction. The pain you felt wasn't from losing them, it was from shedding the part of you that believed you needed them. The version of you that twisted itself into relevance, that watered itself down to be chosen, that begged through perfection. Gone. What's left isn't healed, it's refined, sharpened. You walk differently now, not with arrogance, but with precision. You're not proving anything, you're just unavailable. Not because you're avoiding pain, but because you finally understand what it costs to stay accessible to the wrong ones. It costs your edge, your peace, your instincts. They call you distant now, unreachable, hard to read. Good, let them guess. You owe no one the version of you they once had access to, because you've buried that version deep, under every red flag you ignored, every apology you gave first, every quiet night you waited, hoping they'd do right and they didn't. You've stopped chasing potential. You've stopped falling for patterns dressed as passion. You've stopped explaining your standards like they're a negotiation. They're not. They're a filter. And most people won't pass. Not because you're too much, but because they're used to too little effort, too little discipline, too little truth. You're not intense, you're exact, and that scares them. Because now, you don't stay where you're not seen clearly. You don't argue to be understood. You don't trade your presence for potential. You wait for no one. You choose in silence. You walk in silence. You end in silence. And in that silence, there is one truth echoing behind your eyes, steady as a heartbeat. Self-focus is not selfish, it is survival. Because the world doesn't respect what's always available. It respects what's rare. And now so do you. You've become dangerous. Not because you're violent, not because you're cruel, because you've detached, because you've stopped making your emotions a public playground, because you've stopped asking people to treat you better and started walking like they never had the chance. They don't know what to do with that, because they can't read you anymore. They can't predict you. They can't guilt you into explaining why you're gone or bait you into coming back. They don't understand how someone so open went so silent. But you do. You were never open. You were unguarded. Now you're not. Now you protect your mind like a vault, your time like a currency, your peace like a weapon. And what used to bother you? The petty insults, the shade, the fake checking in, the subtle jabs meant to pull you back into emotional chaos? Nothing. It doesn't touch you anymore, because you've outgrown the emotional need to be understood. You've accepted it. Most people want your energy, not your growth. They want access, not accountability. They want comfort, not confrontation. So you became the opposite. Confrontational in your presence, intimidating in your peace, unshakable in your stillness. You no longer explain what you tolerate. You just don't. You no longer announce who's lost you. You just vanish. You no longer hope for change. You calculate it. If it doesn't serve your direction, it gets left behind. Not with anger. Not with revenge. With silence. They called it cold. But you know what it really is. Power. The kind they can't fake. The kind they can't influence. The kind they can't understand because it was never about them. It was always about you. Rebuilding. Refining. Removing. Until what's left is clear. Focused. Unbothered. You don't look back. You don't explain. You just keep walking past the noise, past the guilt, past the ghosts of who you used to be. Because what you're building now is sacred, and nothing chaotic deserves access to it. You don't need the last word. You don't need to prove the truth. You are the truth, and that alone is enough. Because now, when someone disrespects you, you don't flinch. You don't lecture. You don't educate them on how to treat you. You just remove yourself and never return. That's the new you. No longer emotionally entangled in proving your worth, no longer addicted to potential, no longer looking for crumbs where a table should have been. You starve in silence now and rebuild without witnesses. Because you've learned. They don't have to understand the standard. They just won't meet it. You've stopped hoping for depth in shallow places. You've stopped overvaluing people who undervalue themselves. And most of all, you've stopped selling your peace to buy someone else's company, because you remember what it cost. You remember the mental chaos, the emotional inflation, the subtle betrayal of your own instincts just to stay in someone's life who made you question your worth in theirs. Never again. Now, your presence is expensive, not because you're playing games, but because you finally understand the value of being rare. They said you switched up. Number. You woke up. You saw through the guilt traps, the manipulation, the performative affection. You saw how easy it was for them to say the right thing and do the wrong one. And more importantly, you saw what you became while trying to be loved by someone who didn't even like themselves. You became quiet, careful, exhausted. Now, you're precise, detached, untouchable. They don't know how to reach you because you're no longer reachable through weakness. Only strength, only presence, only silence. And the ones who mistook your kindness for permission, they're gone. Not because you needed them to be, but because they don't survive in this version of you. This version doesn't plead. This version doesn't soften. This version doesn't seek approval. It seeks results. And results don't come from people who waste your time. So no, you're not cold. You're clear. And clarity doesn't negotiate. They won't recognize you now, because everything they used to exploit has been fortified. Everything they used to manipulate has been silenced. Everything they used to access is locked behind indifference. Not numbness, not suppression, precision. They'll say you're acting different, but that's because you're no longer acting. You used to perform emotionally, socially, even spiritually. You played the role they needed, the forgiving one, the available one, the strong yet soft one, the version of you that swallowed pain to keep peace, the version of you that stayed just a little longer, hoping they'd finally get it. But they never got it, because they were never meant to. They weren't confused. They were comfortable, and comfort doesn't change behavior. Discomfort does. Now they're uncomfortable, because you don't respond to bait. You don't argue with delusion. You don't chase what disrespects you, even if it comes with an apology. Because you've realized, people don't come back to make things right. They come back to see if you'll make the same mistake twice. And you won't, not because you're afraid of pain, but because you finally understand it. You've studied the pattern. You've observed the withdrawal. You've remembered the silence that only showed up when you needed something. Now, you remember it all. And not with bitterness, with clarity, because you no longer need to win them back. You need to never lose yourself again. That's the final shift, when your identity is no longer tied to being chosen, when your value isn't a reaction to their validation, when your worth is no longer on trial in someone else's story. You're not waiting to be seen anymore. You've seen yourself, and what you see is dangerous. Still, unbothered, and quietly becoming everything they'll never have access to again. Not because you blocked them, because you elevated beyond them. And the air is different up here. Quieter, colder, clearer. And when you look back, you feel nothing. Because what you once called love was just the leash, and it snapped.